Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to HIPAA Lectures. And this lecture is with partnership with Sony Middle East. I think we have a very interesting topic today, especially for me and for my diverse friends here. I will tell you only some orientation here. We will have about 3 hours lecture, and we will have a small break, 15 minutes break at 7:15 for gents who wish to pray. I think there is no, okay, for gents. Normally we go down to the ground floor and there is a prayer room. And if there is no ladies to pray, there is a room next to the reception. You can pray there. And please don't forget your registration number to take your certificate easily. And also don't forget, if you are following HIPAA on Instagram or Facebook, you will find the live stream link on Instagram and Facebook. If you wish to share it with someone who couldn't make it to come, do it please, and enjoy your lecture. Thank you very much.
Hey everyone, nice to meet you all. My name is Ben Lowy, and I'm a photographer. Now, I say I'm a photographer rather than saying that I'm one type of photographer, because in my career, I've kind of covered everything. And I started very specifically doing conflict work. And that was the whole reason I got into photography, was to be a war photographer. And I basically spent years in Iraq and Afghanistan, and Libya and Darfur, until I had kids. And it kind of made me change my perspective about what I wanted to do and why. I just didn't want to concentrate on just like the worst parts of humanity. And I'll kind of get to the story of how I did that. I was a failed comic book artist. That's basically, I think the best way to succeed in any job is to fail in something so you figure out what you're good at. And I was a really geeky nerd growing up. I was kind of a really fat little kid who played Dungeons and Dragons and just read comic books, and that's all I wanted to do. But when I got to university, I was not very good at drawing. So I ended up grabbing friends off of my soccer team, and I would try and trace them so I could have like better drawing, so I could do like anatomy correctly. My first work-study job in university was to work for the medical school in the morgue, drawing like dead bodies for the medical students, like for their textbooks. So I should probably have known by then that I was okay to go into a war zone. But I ended up, I just couldn't basically get people to do the poses that I want. So I ended up going to bookstores and grabbing photo books and tracing models. And one day I grabbed like a big photo book because I thought it was like another one of like models. It's like big. And it ended up being James Noctuay's book called Inferno, which is war photography from the late 80s until the late 90s. And I sat there transfixed and saying, this is kind of what I wanted to do with my career. And I took a year off from school. And I tried doing different things. This is in St. Louis. I lived in a homeless shelter for 5 months. I lived there. I ate with everyone who was homeless, and I just stayed there. I mean, I went back and forth to my own apartment a few times, but for the most part, I stayed in this homeless shelter and really tried to immerse myself in that culture to create something intimate about this place that I was in. And it really kind of helped me gel how I wanted to tell stories, how I wanted to connect with people by putting myself in these environments. And I felt a little stymied at university and at school, and I tried to figure out what to do. So I took a year off from school and I left. And then I ended up, the story behind this was I ended up going to live with my girlfriend in Paris and went broke right away. I had like no money left, and I was looking for a job. And I incidentally, at this movie called Harrison's Flowers, which is a really bad movie about war photographers, I ended up meeting a photo editor who recommended me to another French photo editor who's saying, oh, we need someone to go to Palestine and to cover like the Second Intifada. So this is like early 2001, saying we need someone who could speak Arabic and Hebrew. And I said, I can totally speak Arabic and Hebrew. I mean, I can't at all, but I just said I did. I didn't even have a camera. They actually gave me 400 canisters of chrome, of slide film, and sent me there. And when I got to Israel, right before I went to Ramallah, where I took this, I actually bought the camera there, and I just had the film with me. And I made, you know, I was very immature in terms of my vision and what I was trying to say, and also just like an idealistic young kid, and I didn't necessarily know what I was doing. But when I came back to the States, I said, this is what I want to do. And I walked in to the offices of Corbis, which doesn't exist anymore, which is a photo agency that Bill Gates made so that in the early 90s, when Bill Gates had electronic frames in his house, he wanted to have images on there, but he wanted them to be copyrighted. So he created this photo agency like Getty to have copyrighted images that he can have in his house on electronic picture frames. And it grew into a news agency. And they had one slot open for covering the Iraq War in 2003 to do an embed. Every agency, every news organization had like one slot to go with soldiers. And the photographer who was going to go is actually a really good friend of mine, is Israeli. And at the last minute, the Kuwaiti government said, we can't let an Israeli photographer come in here, even if he's working for Americans. So about 3 days before the war was scheduled to start, I had walked into this office trying to get an office job because I couldn't find anything else in photography. I had applied to work at Starbucks. I was like trying to do anything I could to find a way. The Starbucks doesn't get you into photography. It was just supposed to get me free coffee. And I walked into the office, and one of the photo editors said, like, we need someone to go to Iraq. Like, do you think you can go to Iraq? I was like, yes, I can do that. I already lied about speaking Arabic and Hebrew. I can probably lie about being able to go to Iraq. And he said, well, show me that you're not going to die if we send you to Iraq. And I basically, I showed them this image. And so I ended up going into Iraq. And what happened was the night the war started, I'm sleeping in my tent. They didn't know what to do with journalists, so they put us in the same tent as the command structure. I was basically sleeping in a tent with about 12 other women. They just didn't know what to do with like journalists yet, embedded journalists. So they kind of just stuck us wherever there was room. And I went to bed, and I'm sleeping in like, you know, just shorts. And there's a gigantic explosion. Just happened, woke me up. Sirens start going off. Smoke starts filling the tent. People are screaming. Now, ironically, as a photographer, I have really bad eyesight. If I take my contacts off, I'm almost blind. So this explosion happens, I can't see anything. And the scud alert went off, which is when you're supposed to like throw your gas mask on. They had trained all this when people thought that Saddam Hussein still had chemical weapons. And so I, grab my glasses, and I'm half awake, and I'm in my shorts, I'm in my sleeping bag, I'm on a cot, and I put the gas mask on. And then I realize that my glasses, the arms of my glasses, are breaking the seal of the gas mask. So it would kind of be useless, right? So I take the gas mask off really quickly, smoke everywhere. I try and put one of my contact lenses in, another explosion, and I poke myself in the eye, and I lose the contact lens. So then I search for another one, and I get my second contact in, so I only have one contact in. And I get the gas mask. At this time, if there was gas, I'd probably be dead. And a third explosion goes off, and this starts melting the tent. The whole tent is on fire. So I have the gas mask on my head, not doing anything, one eye closed because I'm missing a contact. I grab my cameras, and I'm just wearing basically shorts, boxer shorts, nothing else. And I run outside because the tent's on fire behind me. A soldier runs up to me, and he says, "Are you an American?" I said, "Well, yes." He's like, "Well, here, take this." And he hands me an M16 with no clip in it. And I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? He's like, "You're going to protect the berm." It was like really cliche. I don't know why. So I have this gun now, and I put it on my back. But there's no bullets in it. So it's just an M16 and I'm half naked in my shorts with my cameras and a gas mask on my head and one eye closed. And I turned around the corner and I made this image. So I was 23 when I made this image. And it was my first round the world, went everywhere. Major Gregory Stone is one of the first people to die in the Iraq War by friendly fire. It was another soldier who was disgruntled and threw grenades in his commander's tent. And this is like, in terms of lessons that I learned over my career, it's kind of comes with the maturity of being able to look back now as I'm older and realizing that my entire career began with the death of another human being. And I think this is one of those things that photojournalists specifically have to grapple with, is this idea that if everything was happy and life was good, there would be no war photographers, right? And I wouldn't have a career as a war photographer. But because there's war and there's violence, I do, but someone has to die for me to be able to make a picture. And that is something that I had to struggle with a long time, and I learned a lot of lessons through my career about photography and about human life. I stayed in Iraq. I stayed in Iraq for basically 6 years. This was made in Abu Ghraib before the Americans took it over and made it into a prison. It was still Saddam Hussein's old prison, and it was tons of mass graves were there. And I went with a group of men, about 20 men, to go dig up the bodies of their cousins, who they knew were executed and were buried. They knew exactly where it was. And there are a lot of tropes in general in life, like men don't cry. Like it's sort of this universal, men don't cry, right? But when you see a group of men crying, it can't help but take you to a place that you don't know that you're going to be. Like in media, we always see women crying, but we don't see men openly weeping. And when they dug their cousins up, they all started crying. And when I pick up the camera and I'm looking through the viewfinder, I'm thinking about my aperture and my shutter speed, and I'm composing and I'm layering, and I'm fine. Because the camera is an emotional shield. The camera is a way for me not to experience what I'm actually seeing. The fact that I can do something like this or be in a war zone and have bullets flying around me and people dying next to me, but not feel it. You have to have that shield in order to make those images, because there's no other, you have to turn off that piece of emotion. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to do it. Because the minute I took the camera down to check my pictures and look up, I started crying. Because I just couldn't help it. I looked over at the writer who I was with. We were both working for Time Magazine, and he was crying. But I picked up the camera, I started to shoot again, and I was fine. And, you know, again, it's about, I think, I don't say I'm a photojournalist. Like when my wife and I got married, and she's a photographer as well, when you go to the courthouse to sign your documents in the States, you have to say what your occupation is. And she wrote photojournalist, and I wrote photographer. Because I think there's more to it than just being a photojournalist, than just cutting yourself off from everyone else when you're shooting in order to make an image. But these were the type of images that I made for 6 years. This was August 4th of 2007. It's like one of probably the most violent day I've ever gone through in Iraq. It was a 10-car convoy that left the base at 4 in the morning, 4:30 in the morning. Came back 12 hours later, only 4 or 5 cars. I was really injured. I lost all the nerves on the right side of my body. I just had my last surgery to take shrapnel out of my knee about 6 weeks ago. So this is in the morning, where so he is the driver of basically the rhinos, these like mine detecting vehicles, and he hit one of the mines. And so the commander of the unit, actually after he was evacuated, decided to keep on going with the mission, which was basically to deliver aid. It was part of the movement of the Sunni awakening in southern, like 20 miles south of Baghdad, where sheikhs were trying to say, okay, we want to like bring stuff and get rid of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, who had kind of made outposts to the south, away from where the Iranians were coming in. And So it was just bringing rice. It was basically just bringing rice to 3 or 4 towns. And it just kept on hitting IED and after IED. And for the longest time in Iraq, between 2006 and 2008, you could buy flat screen TVs everywhere. But they weren't in a box, right? They weren't boxed, because what was happening is people were taking the flat styrofoam that flat screen TVs are encased in, and they were using those to put the pressure plates for IEDs in them. So when you have a convoy driving past, the first car is always enlisted lower ranked soldiers, just normal guys, not officers in the first car. So as that car goes by, it would just crack the styrofoam of the pressure plate. And then the next car, which had the officers, was the one that took the IED. It was the same like race cars, like RC cars, like remote control cars. You can buy remote control cars all over Iraq, but no remotes, because everyone was using the remotes to turn on all these pressure plated bombs. So I had to get out of doing this hardcore stuff for a little while, and I was trying to figure out how to do that. And I made this image, and it taught me lessons much later on, but I'm lucky I made an image like this really early in my career. This is the day the war ended in 2003, so there was some space between me learning a lesson from this image. But I'm driving over a bridge over the Tigris River to downtown Baghdad. I was actually going to like a journalist party in like the Palestine Hotel. And I had my own car, a 2003 GNC Envoy that I rented from the airport in Kuwait City, and I promised them that I wasn't going into Iraq with this car, and I returned it about 6 months later with no glass in any window at all, and no shocks, and no struts in the back, and a transmission that didn't work anymore. And I was so embarrassed when I returned this car that I actually just drove up. I've never done this before. I drove up to the front of the airport, and I just left it there. I got out and walked in and got on my flight. And I went by budget, and I dropped the keys, and I said, the car's out front. I just didn't even know what was going to happen. So I think we had to buy them a whole new car. Thankfully, I didn't, but Time Magazine bought them a new car. But so it's just a really hot day. I think it was like 44 degrees. And he's going for a swim. It's a simple explanation. He just climbed onto the bridge, climbed onto the lamppost, and he's jumping into the river to go for a swim because it's a hot day. And there was no electricity for like 3 months, so there's no air conditioning. In America, we have a history of lynching photography. And I think people read into this image more than they needed to, but they saw something nefarious. Whether it was in the body language, that he looked like he was hanging, whether it objectified the form, and whether it was just a totally aesthetic image with just blue and black, it said something to people. And I realized that as a photographer, especially in today, when I started, we were seeing 1,000 images a day. 2003, 1,000 images a day, right? I was using the Iraq War, a Nikon D1X camera that cost $10,000, and it was 4 megapixels. I had to like sell my car to buy a second camera after I got out of school so I could just do my job. Today we see 5,000 to 6,000 images a day. Our entire way of looking at images has changed. We see them more vertically than we do horizontally because we see all the images on our phones. It's actually an interesting thing that, like, let's say on Instagram, red and blue are the 2 most successful colors that you need to have to get more likes. And I think all of you should look through your thing, like what images get the most likes on Instagram, and it's always things that have overwhelming red or blue. Why? Because when you're walking down the street looking at your phone, those are the only 2 colors that aren't naturally seen. Like we see skin tone, we see concrete, maybe you see a little bit of grass, you see the grays, you see sidewalk color, but no one sees red because we don't see red down on the ground. So when red pops up on Instagram, people automatically hit like. But that taught me a really important lesson about people's attraction, that you needed to create an aesthetic. You needed to create a hook, a way to look at the audience. I was really frustrated as someone who spent so much time in Iraq, and especially in the States, people didn't care what was going on. I mean, of course, it's like hard, right? There's relative realities. You can't care about everyone, everywhere, all the time. And in the news, they're just going to say another 20 people died, another 40 people died, right? And people die everywhere all the time. I mean, it's a natural part of the world we live in, and you can't make everyone care all the time, but you have to find a way, especially today with news, how do you get that information across? Now, when Nick Ut took the famous image of the girl covered in napalm from the Vietnam War, that was only like one of 12 images that went back to news agencies that day because they were using the telefax machine, which is a giant tube. They'd put the image in it, it would spin, it had a magnet inside it, and that transmitted. It took about 4 hours to send one image back. So they weren't sending, during the Iraq War, I was sending 50 images a day. The guy next to me was sending 50 images a day. We all had like satellite dishes, so thousands and thousands of images. Today, even 10 years ago, were being transmitted every day to news agencies. So that meant that one image didn't get seen everywhere by everyone. That didn't make that impact in the same way that Nick Ut's image or Eddie Adams' images did. So how do you get through to people? How do you make an impact? So and this kind of took me to where even I am today with doing underwater work, is that you have to find an aesthetic. You have to find a way to photograph where you are making the photograph, not taking the photograph. And I think that is a really good way to think about it. I don't mean constructing the photograph like telling people what to do. But we are all of us in this room are a product of every experience we've had in our lives, of how we were raised by our parents, of things we've learned along the way. And when something happens in front of us, all those experiences come together and tell us when to push the shutter button. Some of us are tall, some of us are short. We have different ways of looking at the world. My wife is about this tall, and we could photograph the same thing and it'll look completely different because she's doing it from this perspective and I'm doing it from this perspective. If a car accident happens outside and we run out with our phones and we take a picture of it, we're taking a picture of it. We're just reacting to it. But when you're a photographer, you're not just reacting. You're trying to figure out how to tell this story and how to take all these things that make you who you are to express yourself, but also to tell the story at the same time in the way you are experiencing it. And that is making the photograph. And so I decided that I needed to start making photographs in order to tell the stories that I wanted to get through to people, to get through the audience. So I began this project. Now, it starts off kind of funny, the impetus behind this project, but basically, Baghdad Road between the airport and the hotels was the most dangerous road in the world for a while. Like, you were guaranteed to come under fire no matter what on this road. And so they had this big, for people who got off the airports and the airplanes, they had this armored bus that had explosive armor. It blew outwards if a round hit it to protect everyone inside. So imagine a city bus covered with 70 tons of armor. Basically, if like you press the gas pedal on Monday, the car started moving on Wednesday. And there's not a lot of room on the inside. So you would put all your clothes in a backpack outside the bus. Of course, we came under fire. I lost my backpack, and I had no pants. Now, for some reason, I called my mom and not my wife. I have a feeling my wife would have said no. She just wouldn't have even entertained this. But I called my mom and I said, Mom, can you go to the Gap and can you get me a pair of bootcut jeans, size 32, and you can FedEx them to Baghdad because FedEx worked. And my mom, I love her to death, she said, Ben, why can't you go to the mall? There's no mall in Baghdad. And because I can't also walk outside, I look like Jason Bourne. Let's face it, or Daniel Craig, one of the two. I can't walk. I look like a soldier. There's nothing I can do about it. Like I'm as bald now as I was then. Like I just giant white guy walking through Baghdad. It's not going to work out. So you know what? She's like, I don't know that, Ben. I didn't know that there's no mall. I didn't know that you can't walk around because you're only photographing like dead people in operations and bomb blasts, which was my job. I was working for the New York Times. I don't know what Baghdad looks like. So I was like, you know, okay, next time in a car, I'll photograph outside of a window. And it became a 6-year project of me photographing out of every armored car window that I went in. And I ended up doing a book about it, but it ended up meaning so much more, because the car window became a metaphor. It became a metaphor for the viewfinder of a camera that I look through, or it became a way for how most soldiers who, 70% of the US military is not fighters. 70% of the US military is logistics. That's why they're good. It's because only a small number actually fight, and then everyone else figures everything else out for the people who do fight. So 70% of the military in Iraq weren't actually meeting Iraqis, weren't actually being on the street, weren't actually experiencing what it was like. And this is how when they were driving from bases to other people, this is how they saw Iraq, through a window. And it became also the way the West was seeing the East. And I usually show this a lot to students, when this specific image, because I think this shows like the differences in culture and experiences. Whereas like the normal family scene on the left is sort of universal to everyone, everywhere, like kid on brother's shoulder sort of thing. But this is totally not universal. So because Baghdad doesn't have 24-hour electricity and people can't afford freezers, they go to their neighborhood ice factory and buy a slab of ice that they cut off and take home and put in a cooler. That is super foreign to the West. Everyone has a refrigerator and a freezer at home and makes their own ice. So to me, this was an important way of saying, like, you have to experience some of these things. Some things are universal, like every kid is going to like his brother and sister, and there's going to have that family moment. But then some things are totally foreign. And you have to be able to show that in a way that grabs people's attention. And every time I got into a car, I would just shoot this stuff. And I'd say, see, Mom, there's no mall, and this is what Iraq looks like. Actually, this to me was like, for the longest time, and these have all been painted over now in many ways with like mosaics and different scenes, but this is what Iraq looked like to me for years, of just blast walls and concertina wire, and places that you couldn't go, and places that I couldn't get out of the car to go see. When I was putting the book together, my wife was editing all the images for me. She said, you know what, you have something else here too. I was certified to be able to go out with special forces quite a few times during the war, and there's always someone who left behind a night vision goggle. And usually it's because someone had to wear it, so I had to like wear a night vision goggle. But no one was actually shooting with night vision. And again, this is like the lessons that I learned of trying to create a look for my images just to get through to people. And I actually call it an aesthetic hook, or an aesthetic bridge. It's like a way to connect to the audience. So I could shoot a normal patrol image out with soldiers, but how do I do it in a different way? How do I do something that would grab people's attention? So my wife is crazy about dental hygiene. I don't know why, but she flosses all the time, and I don't. I don't know if that's good or bad, but she would pack dental floss in my bag because she would know that I wasn't going to use it, or that I wouldn't. I mean, I didn't use it, but what I did, dental floss is an amazing tool for tying a night vision goggle to the front of your camera. It was like chewing gum and dental floss, and I would get this military night vision goggle, and I'd stick it on a 50-millimeter lens, and I'd wrap it around with like spearmint dental floss so my camera smelled really good. And I found this was like a different perspective of seeing Iraq, whereas looking through the windows of the Humvees was about this barrier. There's no electricity at night, so Iraqis don't even get to see what their own country looks like at night, but the Americans or the occupiers do. And for the longest time, it's like they had the technology to see something that the people who lived there didn't even get to see. Like, this was a mechanic that was being arrested because someone had informed on him saying he was building bombs. He doesn't even know that I'm there. He doesn't see anything. This was on a night that had like 0 stars, 0 moon. You wouldn't be able to see your hand in front of your face. And the only people who see are the people who don't actually live in this place. And so it became like the second chapter in this giant book. And when I came out with the book, I figured like that was it. I was done with Iraq. I'm not going back. And I started to try and concentrate on other things. But the lessons that I learned about trying to create a unique look for every story was something that I took with me throughout the rest of my career. So this is oil in the Gulf. This is when the Deepwater Horizon sank. It was the fire in 2010 and sank in the Gulf. Millions and millions of barrels of oil all over the Gulf of Mexico. And if any of us, we grew up in the 80s, if you remember the Exxon Valdez, that happened right offshore. And people were coming out of the water in suits, like covered in oil with animals and like trying to clean them off, and they're covered in oil. And it created a visual trope for how you photograph an oil spill. Except that this happened in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico in international waters. So like if we were on a helicopter one time to go on a rescue mission, and they actually had to call NORAD and tell them that they're like a Coast Guard helicopter coming back in, not to shoot them down, because it was 50 miles offshore in the middle of the water. So there was no walking around and coming to shore with oil on your body. And so how do you photograph that? And how do we photograph something that's so horrible in a way that you want people to look at it? For the longest time, all the photographers who were down there, I mean, there was like convoys. Like if we heard that there was like a turtle covered in oil, like 12 of us would get in 12 cars and we'd like scream down the street and we're all like, "Where's the turtle?" And we're trying to get there. We get to the beach, and then we're clustered around the one turtle. Or like, the shrimp fishermen couldn't go out. They were not allowed to go out. So you have a guy sitting in the dock being like, I'm a sad fisherman. And all of us are standing there taking a picture of the sad fisherman. He's like this, "I'm so sad because I can't fish." Like how do you tell that story? Then the problem is that we're all making the same images and no one cares. Now there's the power of photography is making an image of something really, really horrible into something beautiful. So what I did is I went back as soon as the oil was kind of coming closer to land, and I sacrificed all my leg hair because they wouldn't let me back into port if I had oil on my legs. And these aren't aerials from a plane. These are from 5 feet. This is me in the water shooting straight down into the oil. And when I got back onto the boat, we had to like scrub the boat clean to get back into the harbor, and the harbor master looks at me and be like, "You can't come back because you're covered, your legs are full of oil." I was like, "What am I supposed to do?" I used all Blue Dawn, like the blue dishwashing soap, is the only substance on the planet that can remove oil from organic substances. No one knows why. The lemon flavored Dawn, not flavored, but the lemon scented Dawn, it doesn't do it. Only the blue one. So for like 2 months, you couldn't find Blue Dawn anywhere in the United States. It was all being taken and going straight to the Gulf to like clean off birds and boats. And I used all my Blue Dawn to clean off my boat. And so the guy just had a razor, and he threw it into my boat from the dock and was like, "You better start shaving." And I'm sitting there, and everyone's watching me, and I'm like just shaving my legs. It was the only way they would let me back in after I made these images. But again, this was a different way of looking at an oil spill, trying to make something beautiful, trying to make something different that would attract an audience. So I played around a lot. And this is eventually how I like to play around. I've done fashion, done sports. Each genre of photography is a way for me to experiment, to figure out what I'm doing. So when the iPhone first came out, I was playing around with it. I had an assignment from a client who wanted me to shoot on a Hasselblad X-Pan, which is a panoramic camera with chrome film. I didn't really remember how to shoot chrome film. I don't know if it's like 2/3 of a stop overexposed to get a better image. And basically, it's to go to this place where like 15%, it's a town in Colorado called Yerevan, where 15% of the yellow cake for the Manhattan Project came from, for the atom bomb in World War II. And the town is so radioactive because they didn't mine the yellow cake very well back then that the US government decided to bury it forever. That's actually a piece of yellow cake. I have superpowers now, by the way, because I was just standing next to that. It's like I turned into the Hulk later on. But when I made these images, I was shooting with chrome film, and I was scared that like I wasn't exposing it correctly because I didn't remember how to shoot with film. So I just pulled out my iPhone, and I was like, let me take a backup image. And I ended up printing these out. And this is actually where the town is buried. It cost $1 billion for them to make this symbol that you can see from outer space, because they said in 10,000 years, if there are no more humans and aliens come here, they should know not to go to this town. Because like the half-life of uranium will still be, yeah. Someone, taxpayer money, went to making a giant alien symbol that says don't land here. But so I printed these out at home, and I brought them into the office, and they're like, what did you make this with? It looks like it was taken with a Polaroid film. I was like, yeah, I made it with my phone. We should go to lunch. I was trying to totally change that. This is the iPhone 1. Like, people were not into this. And they actually wouldn't run it. Incidentally, I did expose the chrome film, so that's what they ended up running. But then I was like, oh, there's something here about using an iPhone. But what can I do? And so taking my lesson from Iraq of being this giant soldier-looking person who, with cameras, not being able to, I was like, maybe I can do something different. I got brown contact lenses. I didn't have tattoos back then, so I had like one, but I covered that up. Dyed my skin really dark, grew a beard out, put Just for Men that actually comes off when you sweat, so it just started getting my chin and my neck were black. But I like dyed everything, bought clothes, and started walking around, not with my cameras, but with my iPhone. And I ended up being able, this is the only gun I saw in Afghanistan. I mean, I saw other guns, but this is like my own, like I never, 5 years in Afghanistan, I was never in a single violent anything. I did the coolest stories. I like did bodybuilding in Afghanistan. The Taliban, who they were not really Taliban, they were drug dealers basically, but they let me like go with them from like making opium to smuggling it into Iran to, I shouldn't admit it, but I crossed over into Iran really briefly and then came back to Afghanistan, like all kinds of crazy things, but like nothing like dangerous, no gun battles, nothing. And I'm just, half of it I shot with my iPhone. Actually, I say this is my cat picture because you know the crazy statistic that Caltech and MIT did a joint program and they sent an artificial intelligence supercomputer out onto YouTube to look at every single clip ever uploaded to YouTube and to come back with a mosaic of information of what are people looking at, and it just came back with a picture of a cat. Because there are more pictures of cats on the internet than anything else in the history of mankind. That really makes me sad. But this is my cat picture. But like, so I started doing social media. I got on Instagram really quickly and Tumblr when they first came out. And having an effect on the society is cool now because you can do it, right? So I would have loved to have been in this meeting. This is in the downtown Kabul, and this is the Western supermarket. Because like after 3 months of being, you know, I just want to have some like breakfast cereal. So I'd go to like Western supermarket just to get like Captain Crunch or something. And I don't know why they decided to do this, but the owners of this supermarket decided to print up the face of a woman. And the only way you can go shopping in the supermarket was to walk through her mouth. I don't know why anyone thought this was a good idea. And I took this image, and I said, this is probably not a good idea, and I posted it online. I said, look what's happening. And they immediately got a lot of threats and had to take it down. So from a varied source of people, like from feminists and from the, like, so the people who followed me were like, I had feminists in college who were in my photo class, and then like the Taliban fixers that helped me do my opium story, both follow me on Facebook and on Tumblr. It's like really weird bringing people together. And they both really didn't like that you had to walk through a woman's mouth to go shopping. And there were a lot of comments to that effect. And this actually came down, not because of me, but it came down like 2 days later. And so I was starting to see like there's I don't know if Cartier-Bresson would be like rolling over in his grave with this image or not. The idea that like I took it with an iPhone. And I used to actually get hate mail. I used to get emails from people being like, I can't believe you're using an iPhone. Like this was published in the New York Times. And I just spent $10,000 on camera gear and all this stuff and lenses, and you're using your phone. It's not right. What I ended up doing was I went to Libya, and I was working for GQ. And so GQ publishes 4 months down the line. It's not like publishing news right now, right? So how do I tell the story about what's happening in Libya and keep it fresh and get an audience? So what I did was I traveled with my normal 35mm cameras and then also my phone. And I would transmit from the field. And basically, a friend of mine was the cameraman for Al Jazeera, and he set up a Wi-Fi dongle because they put like a satellite van every kilometer to bump the signal back from the front line so they could shoot live. And he just put like a little Wi-Fi router in the camera. And so, I mean, in the satellite truck. So in the trenches, as the fighting is going on, I had a Wi-Fi signal, which was crazy. So like, people are firing, and I'm like taking a picture with my phone and posting it on Instagram with no hashtags because it was tough to type in that environment. But this is the idea of like, one is with 35mm and one is with my iPhone. And I was like, people are like, oh, it's not good enough. Like it's not like that thing flying through the air is the shell casing, and this is like the iPhone 3. So it was like, this is right in the middle. This is right outside of Benghazi. It's like the kids from university were like firing towards like Gaddafi's positions. It worked. And I ended up building like a big body of work on this, and this whole idea of like teasing the audience with images on social media and then saying, go to the magazine later on and look at the work that I did with 35mm. So 2 of my friends got killed in Libya, Tim Hetherington and Chris Hondros. And my wife, I was actually supposed to be with them, and my wife was pregnant. She was in her 3rd trimester, and she was going to the hospital for a checkup, and a taxi cab rear-ended her. Like at least in America, like if you're in a car accident in your 3rd trimester, you automatically go to the hospital. And I had another son at home and 2 dogs, wiener dogs that are very high maintenance. And she was like, you have to come home. And my friends were all going to Misrata the next day. And I said, okay, I don't want to, but I'll come home because I'd be a really, really bad husband if I didn't. And they were killed. And I kind of decided at that point I needed to change my career a little bit. Needed to try something else out. Maybe not go back to war. I have 2 kids. What else is out there for me to do? I have a really good friend who's photo editor at ESPN. He started throwing me out sports work. He's like, sports, it's like war. You have to get there, and it's one moment, and it never happens again, and you just use longer lenses. And I ended up so I started doing sports for a while, and ended up getting sent to the Olympic for Harper's, and it was sort of a dream assignment because the editor was like, just do it all in black and white, make art out of the Olympics, do whatever you want, bill me, and we'll see it in like 3 weeks. And I ended up just really playing with the idea of how do you represent sports in an artistic way? What can I do that's different or that's not like the cliche way? So I had a great mentor when I first started, David Burnett. And he was like, whenever you see like a flock of photographers, go someplace else. Like just do something different because all these guys are going to get the same image. So like sometimes that's really great advice. The ski jump, the hardest thing I've ever had to photograph because it's an optical illusion. The guys come off and like sail past you. It's on a really steep stairs. It's like you're doing deep squats just to walk up there. And I was like, all the photographers are on one side of the stairs. We're all ready. We got these long guns. I need to go someplace else, take this advice. So I went underneath the ramp of the actual ski jump, and I'm ready. And then all I get are like butts sailing across in the night away from me. And that didn't work. But But then sometimes that advice totally works. Aerials, right? So Sochi Olympics are actually really warm. It was not that hot. I mean, excuse me, it was not that cold. It was much warmer than it should have been. Like the snow was all melting. And all the photographers are at the end of the ramp where people do these things. And I'm like, I'm slope certified, had a little ice pick, and I'm wearing shorts and like a jacket, and I have like 7 cameras, like long lenses, short lenses, primes, all this different stuff. And I have my little ice pick, and I'm climbing up the side of the island, and it's hot, and I'm sweating, and the ice is melting, and the snow, and there's water everywhere, and it's getting all over my cameras, and I just go like this with my sweat, and I wipe it off, and all of a sudden that made the most amazing streaks on my camera lens. This is all nose grease, basically, and sweat. I mean, maybe I have like a really good, I should bottle it, but like I would just be like wiping like this and like rubbing it on the lens, and it would create these streaks of light. Now, I didn't know that this was happening when I shot it. I'm just like sweating, doing this, and like wiping the snow off the lenses because I'm falling over because it's all melting. And these guys are doing these flips, and I'm shooting, and I'm like, there are these fingers of God coming out from the lights. And I was like, they're reaching up, and I was like, this is perfect, and no one else was there. And I had to slide all the way back to get down. But that was really fun. I really dug doing sports for a while. So I ended up doing a bigger project on sports, on wrestling. I was part of a friend of mine is a big wrestler. I was a big wrestler, sort of. But it was part of this Save Wrestling campaign, with this idea that, you know, wrestling got kicked out of the Olympics for a little bit, and they wanted to save it, so I went to all these places that had traditional wrestling techniques, where wrestling was born. Wrestling is like the world's earliest sport, and it's really interesting. In Greece, where it was born, it was to train soldiers. Like, it was used to train soldiers without weapons. In Sudan, where it was also born at the same time, it was used as conflict resolution between people arguing over whose cow was who. It was basically shepherds wrestling to just say, that's my cow, that's your cow. So the world's earliest sport was both for war and anti-war at the same time. And I thought that was really interesting. So I started going around the world photographing wrestling, the catch-all being that I wrestled first. I don't know if it makes a difference with the photos, but the idea that I am in the very same loincloth that everyone else is wearing. When I made these images, like, they let me into the temple, I get the loincloth on. It's actually the little kids, the novice kids, who like put the loincloth on the older wrestlers. So I'm like standing there, and like this little 8-year-old is like putting this thing on me and tucking me in, and it's really tight, and then you're good to go. And they're like, you're an American, you eat well, so you can wrestle this guy who has 30 kilos on you. And he threw me around for 9 minutes. I couldn't move my neck for like a week. But then they're like, you can photograph anything you want after this. And it was great. So this is in southern India, where I went to all these like temples for wrestling. And I came back to the States, and you know, I'm still a photojournalist. Like, that's still how I make most of my living. So of course, 2016 is campaign time. And I was working for Time Magazine. I spent like months on Donald Trump's campaign. I spent months on Hillary's campaign. And you try to make fun images. But often, you're left with politics, right? So, sometimes it's better, in photography, it's better to say sorry than ask permission. Now, you are not allowed to use flash when you are in the 10 people who get to travel in the buffer with the candidates. Like, you are not allowed to use a strobe, because especially when they're speaking. Like, the Secret Service gets all over you. So I'm like, it's right at the end when she's about to get nominated. It's like the last day of the Democratic convention, and I'm like, no one's going to care. And I just put it on there, and I'm waiting. I'm waiting for the moment. And like, we see this happening, and all my friends who are like around me, they're like, yes, we're doing it. And I like, flash. So that's the only difference. I have the same image as the Washington Post photographer who's standing right next to me. His doesn't have flash. Mine's better. I hope he's watching. But, you know, I had the chance to really get in there. I really wanted to photograph his hair, because maybe there's hope for me. If I could see what his technique of weaving the comb over, I could do it. But I'm just going to leave this up. I got so sick of, like the last day right before the election, my photo editor was like, Ben, you're big, and it's rough for journalists out there. Do 100 push-ups, wear your tightest t-shirt, maybe a camouflage baseball cap, and just walk into the crowd at the last Trump event. And I'm just like, I'm out there, and I'm like, standing there like this, walking through the crowd, trying to like be super intimidating so no one bothers me. And it was rough, and like I'm taking pictures, but I'm super tense because I'm waiting for something to happen. And it's just not a way to be. And I'm standing in the buffer. A friend of mine is an AP photographer. I hadn't seen him in years. He's like, I hear you've been photographing sharks of late. And I had done like one little shark assignment right before I did this. And I was like, yeah. And I started showing him some pictures on my phone. And in the front row, he had all these Trump supporters really like just yelling at the media the whole time. And they look over our shoulder as I'm showing him some pictures of sharks on my phone. And they're like, oh, that's awesome. And then all of a sudden, the Trump supporters and the journalists were all looking at my phone, at my shark pictures, and we were all cool with each other. And it was like, all of a sudden, I found this common ground that we could like not be upset at each other. And I realized when I go underwater, animals don't care about your religion or your skin color or your politics. They're just either going to eat you or they're not going to eat you. That's it, right? And there's a certain piece to that. And I realized that when I'm underwater, I also don't need to talk to anyone, which I really, really enjoyed. Like I go scuba diving with my wife now, and she just looks at me, like glares at me through the mask, but I don't know what she's saying. And that's really much better than if I had to deal with it at home. So I started getting all these adventure and wildlife assignments because people were like, oh, you're big and you can handle climbing a mountain, or this is actually in a plane, but this is in Iceland of braided rivers. Like you can handle. I did a cold weather medical first aid exchange with the all volunteer paramedics in Iceland, where basically you just save people who don't know how to drive through water and through snow. And I stayed extra time in Iceland, and I was completely by myself, and I was sleeping in a car, and I had spoken to my wife when I had cell phone reception, and she was like, you sound really happy being completely alone and by yourself. And I'm like, yeah, I'm like hiking, and I'm not talking to anyone, and yeah, I'm actually enjoying being completely alone. And I started getting more of these little fun assignments. So a photo editor sent me to the last island right before Antarctica to track pumas, because pumas, mountain lions, and cougars, all the same animal. One of the most successful animals in North and South America, stretch all the way up from Canada all the way down to the southern tip of Chile. Like they're the opposite of endangered. They are not endangered. And I took the time while I was there to go to this very last island in the Straits of Magellan, where there's this colony of penguins who are all widows or widowers, or male and female, but their spouses, because penguins are one of the few creatures that are super monogamous. Like once they get married and mate, they stay with that mate forever no matter what. But this is an island of widowers, penguins, who don't migrate with their children. So every now and then, the kids all leave, they go to a different island, and the old widowers just stay together and are super sad. And it's kind of depressing. You go to this island, they hang out with each other, and they go in like these pairs, but they're either all male or they're all female, and they're not mating, and they're just old. It kind of reminds me of a retirement home. It's a retirement home, but for penguins, and it smells horrible. And I also want to say that we killed a few of them on the way. I did. But like the boat has like this drawbridge that comes down when you come to the island. And like there'll be like these penguins and be like, what's that? and it just falls, and they like, so like 4 go splat every time people visit. But it's okay because they're sad. And but so I learned something really interesting when I was in Iraq about animals, and I didn't know that this would be a piece of advice that I'd take with me into the field. Animals see a camera as a giant unblinking eye. And because it's unblinking, it is threatening them for dominance. When after the Iraq War was over, they found that like Uday Hussein had kept 2 lions in one of his palaces that he fed people to when he ever was in the mood to feed people to lions. And this was like sort of a PR stunt. The Americans brought in a zoologist from the San Diego Zoo to train these lions off the taste of human flesh. There's no really good reason to do this, but they decided to like, we're going to bring this guy in, and he's going to make these lions, he's going to reform these lions like they're prisoners that are going to be okay afterwards. And I don't know how it worked out, but when I went in to go see him and I'm photographing the lions, they jumped on the cage, like they were just going to tackle me. And he's like, no, 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 they see the camera as it's threatening them for dominance, so blink your camera. And I was like, what do? Do I do this? Like, do I create an eyelid? Like, how do I do this? He was like, just turn it up and down. And if you turn it up and down, the animal is seeing the camera as submitting to them. Like, they're not even seeing me. They're just seeing the camera as this weird-looking, one-eyed creature held by another creature. I don't know. I really wonder how, when I was doing the pumas, these are unhabituated. They've never seen human beings before. It's in a really rugged part of Chile that most people don't go to. These have never seen human beings. I'm trying to imagine what an animal thinks when you have like this metal thing, this vehicle that then vomits out 2 smaller, meaty people with legs. Like, I'm trying to, like, how does an animal see? Like, does it see a car as an animal that then just poops out human beings? Like, what does an animal think when it sees that happen? And I was lucky enough, the Nat Geo photographer had just left after 3 months of trying to get a kill of a puma killing a guanaco. And they're like, we couldn't get it. It doesn't happen. No way. And I'm like, oh yeah, I'm standing there. I have this giant camera. I have a 1200 millimeter lens. So it's a 600 with an extender. It's 25 pounds. And we see it's like a mile away. This puma is stalking a guanaco. A guanaco is the stupid cousin of the llama. So a guanaco just stands there and goes, eat me. Doesn't run away. It knows the puma is there, and it just stands there. It's like, I'm food. Hi. And so we see this happening. We're running down. I'm literally running down a mountain. I slide, I fall, but it's going so fast that when you fall down the mountain, you actually roll back into standing position. So I'm like going, and I'm back up. I'm like, ooh, that was convenient. And I shoot this kill. This is from so far away and so cropped in. Now, to get really close, you have to be creative. And I was working with a tracker who's amazing. He's a former LA gang member who's addicted to heroin, who wanted to get out of this crowd, and he's, for some reason, is really attracted to big cats, and he's a very good tracker, and he learned it from his father a long time ago, and he was like, I have to get away from the gang life, and he started leading people on these big cat treks all around the world, and it took him away from heroin and the gangs, and that's all he does now, and he's super cool. And he was like, Ben, you know what we need to do? We need to cover ourselves with baby puma feces all over our bodies in order to get close to these females. Like, that sounds like not such a great idea, but I did it anyways. So we spent 3 days covered in poop, just rubbing it all over our bodies and sleeping in the den with these female pumas. And of course, there's that moment when you don't smell like poop anymore, when it's washed off you because of the sweat, and you're downwind of a hungry puma. And I have my camera. The wind changes. You can see the direction of the grass, and my smell is in her nose. And I just start blinking the camera. She walked right past me. I mean, within 5 feet. I'm just like, I'm not food. I sort of smell like your babies, but not really. I ended up doing a photojournalism assignment in Palau. Palau is this island kind of near Micronesia. It's really far. It's one of those weird places where everyone drives with American-style cars, so the steering wheel is on the side we all drive with here. It's on the left side of the car, but you drive on the opposite side of the road. It's really confusing. There are a few places in the world that are like that, where you're supposed to drive on this side of the road, but your steering wheel is also on that, so you have to stay near the curve. I thought I was going to kill people as I drove the car. And I had the job to, Palau has a maritime police, a navy, not really a navy, it's sort of a navy, 19 guys. And they patrol an area the size of France. It's the world's largest shark reserve. And so it was about this longer piece that the New York Times was doing about like piracy and illegal fishing all around the world. And so I went to do this part in Palau. And I heard in Palau there is this jellyfish lake, which is not there anymore, but it was when I went. And basically, this is survival of the fittest in a very small microcosm. So second ice age happens, and these volcanic columns come up and create like these little pools of salt water cut off from the rest of the ocean, but still filled with the same life that's in the rest of the ocean. After 10,000 years, the jellyfish in this part won and killed everything else that was stuck in there with them. Sharks, other fish, anything. They won. They killed everything. And then it was just the jellyfish that were left, stinging each other. So they probably got together, had a meeting, said we probably shouldn't be stinging each other, so we're going to evolve to not have stingers. So these are some of the only jellyfish in the world that don't sting, because otherwise they'd be killing themselves. And what they do is there's only a finite amount of food, and they basically are reacting to the sun. They move across this lake where the sun goes and where kind of little algae kind of grow in the water. And when they've eaten up every possible thing, they kind of go into this Medusa larval stage, which is what they are now, and they disappear for like 10, maybe 20 years, no one knows, and then maybe they'll come back. So like if you go to Jellyfish Lake now, there's no jellyfish, because they've actually disappeared. But so I was like, this is a kind of amazing opportunity to like go shoot something kind of cool, like swim through a giant thing of jellyfish. I mean, right? It's cool, except if you go past 30 feet, you die. So after also 10,000 years, all the decomposing jellyfish have sunk to the bottom of this lake, and it's filled with nitrogen and sulfur and things that are not good for your body. So if you go down to 30 feet, beyond 30 feet, and spend any amount of time there past like 2 or 3 minutes, which most people can't hold their breath that long, you're just going to die. So you're not allowed to scuba dive in Jellyfish Lake. You can only snorkel, because people are like, you're going to go down too deep, and then you're going to have a heart attack. But this is the fun thing. So a lot of tourists come to Palau, and there's 3 kind of camps of tourists. They're like European tourists, Chinese tourists, and Japanese tourists. So there's 3 camps, and the whole island is kind of split between hotels that work for the Chinese tourists, hotels that work for like the European tourists, hotels that work for the Japanese tourists. And same with like gift shops. There are like 3 different gift shops, and there are different scuba diving expeditions. Now the thing is, a lot of the Chinese tourists come because it's so close to China, are just like middle class coming on vacation. If people are coming from America or Europe, it's an expensive trip. So it's like a $6,000 trip, so they're coming with all their gear, and these are people who are really serious about Palau, and they want to do all the diving. But the Chinese tourists, it's just a trip that's close to home. It's kind of cheap. So it's not like serious scuba divers. It's snorkelers. And it's people who also don't know how to swim. So when the Chinese tourists go to Jellyfish Lake, they're all wearing life jackets. And they all have like GoPros, some little action cams and cameras. And inevitably, they drop them. And every Sunday, the Jellyfish Lake was closed to tourists. And only people who worked on the island, dive instructors, or anybody who worked on the island, it was open to people who had a work visa. So anybody who worked in the dive shops. What they did was, they practiced their free diving, and you would go down to 30 feet, not spend more than 5 minutes so you don't die, and collect as many GoPros and phones and cameras as you could that people dropped, and bring them back up and sell them back to the stores so you could get your GoPro back eventually for double the price. And this was kind of like the first time when I was doing this story on the Maritime Police. It was the first time that I ever really experimented with underwater photography. Like I was like, I should probably shoot this because why not? I got a little point and shoot, tiny point and shoot, a little housing that Sony gave me, and I was like, oh, I'll just go there, I'll make some images. And the New York Times loved it, and they ended up running basically a separate feature on Jellyfish Lake that had nothing to do with the original story I went there for. Which I kind of tend to do. Whenever I go to a place, I try and make other images that are not the story that I have an assignment for, because there's cool stuff everywhere, and you don't have to get tunnel vision and just do your assignment or one thing. You can do other things. So they were really happy, and they called me and said, Ben, we really liked what you did with the Jellyfish Lake, and we would love, there's a travel section there, we'd love to do something else. It's the end of the year. We have about $8,000 left in our fiscal year-end budget for the travel section. And like, what would you like to do? And I'm on the internet, randomly, something popped up, and I'm like, I don't know, I haven't been diving since I was 15, but why don't we do great white sharks? If I'm gonna go all in, this is my lesson. So like, if I'm gonna go to war, I'm gonna go to Iraq, right? So if I'm gonna go scuba diving, why not go big the first time? I don't deal with little small fishes, right? Like, there's small fishes, anybody could do it, but, what about a big boy? So I ended up going to Isla Guadalupe and do a story on ecotourism on great white sharks. And of course, yes? Okay, I will tell you this story when we come back. Hey, Ben. Yeah, I'll just go through. Okay. Yeah, of course. So just to recap, um, so I decided to just go with great white sharks as my first scuba diving experience, really, since I was 15. When I was 15, my dad worked as like a doctor at a Club Med in the Caribbean, and I came for one summer and I got my scuba diving certification, and I floated really well because I was still that really fat little kid. I think scuba diving is the only sport where it doesn't matter if you're in good health at all. And I mean, you pee in your wetsuit, and anyone who tells you that they don't is lying. And you spit in your mask, and extra fat helps you float and keeps you warm, and then you get out and people just smoke. I've never seen a group of unhealthy people as much as scuba divers. But so they were like, oh, we have this leftover money, and like, you go do great white sharks. I'm like, great, I'm going to go do great white sharks, and how do I scuba dive? Because I didn't remember how to do it, so I took a really quick refresher course. I'm like, this does this, and I'm good to go. I had to rent housing, which is actually, this is the housing that I used, which I rented, and now I own, which is this giant thing that could kill someone. Does not help you float at all. It actually drags you down into the depths of the sea. But you know, my Sony cameras like fit inside this. And anyone, you guys can play with that if you want. I mean, play with it, but don't throw it around. So this is a story on great whites, on ecotourism. So like people come from all over the world to go. There's this one island called Isla Guadalupe. It's kind of like the size of Manhattan. No one's on there except like the Mexican military and some fishermen and scientists who study great whites. So if you guys know anything about great whites, like we don't know a lot about great whites. In fact, we don't know a lot about sharks in general. This is what I found really interesting. Is like I'm now learning more about, as I, you know, like I studied political science in university, which served me in my photography career this much. But like when I went to Iraq or Afghanistan, like I had some understanding of history, of what was going on, and that would inform how I wanted to cover it. When I started doing underwater work, I had no idea about anything. So sharks, like a good 20% of the sharks that are out there have only been discovered in the last 15 years. That we only have the technology to even see them now. And there's so many more that we don't even know about. We've never even seen great whites mate. We know that it's probably burly and dangerous and violent, but we've actually, no human being has ever seen it happen. We've never seen a birth of any sharks. Of any of the big sharks, we've never seen a birth. Tiny ones, yeah. But these big ones, they go down deep, deep into the sea. There's an area off the coast of Los Angeles, about 400 miles off the coast, that's called Shark City. And it happens at about 400, 500 feet. No one knows for sure. But at one point in the year, almost every tagged shark in the Pacific goes there, swirls around for a few weeks, and then leaves. And we think this is kind of, they're great whites that live in the Atlantic, and they're great whites that are in the Pacific, and they're different social structures. We don't really know much beyond that. Sometimes there have been tagged sharks that have gone from the Pacific to the Atlantic, and that's a crazy trip because they're not going through the Panama Canal. So they're like going all the way down and around. That's a crazy trip. But like for the most part, they're two very different groups that have different social structures, we think, that kind of act in a different way. And what happens is, after they go to Shark City and maybe mate, we don't know, they come past Isla Guadalupe, a lot of them. And there were a lot of seals at one time, and they used to feed there. And it's cold, so it is about 68 degrees Fahrenheit, so someone else can convert that. not going to do the math, but it's cold. It's very, very cold. And they kind of swim there, and there are a bunch of different rules. The rules change every year. So at 40 feet, years ago, you were allowed to have bait with you. And so it would be like a frozen tuna head, not bloody, because here's the thing, like the great whites in South Africa, they can put 2 and 2 together. When they do all that, they put chum in the water and blood, they get really pissed off. And they've been able to see that they connect the chum in the water to the fishing line, to the boat, to human beings. They understand that it's us doing it to them, and that's why they're very aggressive in South Africa. In Guadalupe, the Mexican government has been really active about trying to make that not happen, to not get them pissed off. So we only, as bait, just to get them to come in, it's all frozen fish heads and frozen body parts that kind of sit there, that kind of have a smell, but isn't bloody, isn't saying there's something dead in the water, and it's not trying to create a frenzy. Because if anyone has been like with a bait box on the bottom of the sea, you know, I've been in the middle of it, and I had like a shark eat an action cam. We got it back, weirdly, later on. The footage wasn't very good, but you know, they go crazy. I've been slapped in the face with a fin, like just, it's like my wife just hitting me. But you know, it's dangerous with this feeding frenzy. So like you have this burlap sack that just has a piece of frozen fish in it, and at the time, the New York Times was like, we really need a picture of the cage to tell the story about tourists going cage diving with sharks. So, you know, I need to position myself to get the cage, which means I'm not in the cage. But actually, there's another one behind me, and someone's holding my legs, and I'm fully out, and the dive master is holding this burlap sack with the tuna fish about 5 feet over my head, and she's just going for that. You can usually, and I learned this later on. Remember, I just forgive the pun, but I dive straight into opportunities. So when they were like, "What do you want to do?" I'm going to do great whites. I don't know necessarily everything that I'm doing, which is okay. So like with underwater photography, most photographers don't drop below f8 or like stay at f11, and I'm like at f4. I'm like, f4. I don't know. What are you supposed to do? There are no rules. I didn't make them up. I'm not going to follow them. That's like the best Eugene Smith quote ever. When someone asks him like if he sets up stuff or like puts stuff together in his Pittsburgh body of work from the 50s and 60s, he was like, I didn't make up the rules, so why should I follow them? And I'm very much in that category. Like, I don't know if there's like a proper aperture you're supposed to be for underwater photography. So sometimes if you stick at f2 underwater, things get really weird. And you know, so that's how you discover like a new look or a new way to represent things. So, you know, I'm just diving in there and not knowing much, not knowing that like great whites, when they get really pissed off, they turn their fins. So they'll actually turn, they're like our shoulders. So when sharks get pissed off, they like lower their shoulders the same way like you do. When you're ready for a fight, they go down. Like sharks go straight down. And great whites will actually turn their fins. And if you see like the little black parts, you are out of luck. But she's like happy. Her fins are up. She's not down. She's pregnant maybe. Big one. She's just coming in, and I'm like out. I'm like, this is fun. So, you know, that was my first time. It was memorable. This is a post-coital female. So the mating for great whites is like super violent, super fast, because we think the male has to turn. Males are much smaller than females, and the male has to like kind of goes upside down in order to connect, and if a shark goes upside down, they pass out. They kind of almost go in a catatonic state. So they have to bite down. In the same way horses, male horses will bite down on the mane of a female horse. Sharks don't have manes, so the male shark just bites the female. And so females will always have like crazy bite marks after the mating season. It's over in a second. They just bite, spin, and like separate, and it's done. The cool thing about sharks is that that'll be healed in like 3 weeks. There might be like a couple of scarring on the coloration of her skin, but that whole wound will be gone. It'll heal. Like that's how quickly they heal, but it just doesn't seem like a lot of fun, that whole thing. But this is a male shark kind of coming back into the water after launching itself up. And I sort of like, you have these different cages in Guadalupe where one will be at like 40 feet and one will be at 6 feet. And I like the one at 40 feet because the sharks aren't jumping around and some of the bait fish stay away, and you can just get these little clear shots of the sharks kind of going around your cage. But the Mexican government changed the rules in the last 2 years that you can't take bait with you down into the cages. So a lot of times you get lowered to 40 feet and you're sitting there and there's like a shark who come by, be like, what's that? And then like swims away and goes to the baits on the surface. So for the last couple of years I've been staying at the surface and trying to get more footage of like the interaction. This is actually a male, and the way you can tell is these are the claspers. They basically have two penises, just because mating is so violent that sometimes one of them gets ripped off or bitten, or other males do it to other males. Like you'll have, there are definitely instances where, and they don't like doing it in front of human beings or other species, but they will face off against each other. They'll go really deep, and like one male will like bite another male, and they'll like fight for the option to like mate with female. And then females can get really pissed off. So some female great whites have been known to just self-fertilize. They're like, I don't want to deal with any males. I'm just going to do this on my own. It's not good for the species because you only get half the chromosomes, but like they can do that. This is Persephone. She's 18.5 feet long. I believe the third biggest Pacific great white shark ever recorded. She's really big. I can't even, like, this is shot with a 12mm lens. It's like super wide. I am probably like 4 feet from her. It's hard to explain how big she is. It's like a school bus swimming in front of you, because they're also like wide. They're not like, the males are small, but like they're giant. And there's something to be said about, like, you have to, again, just put your camera down for a second and look at it with your own eyes. This is like one of the oldest creatures in the world. Sharks have pretty much not changed since the age of the dinosaurs. Yes, the Meg is extinct if you go see that movie. Also, for some reason, they didn't put the right amount of gills in the shark in that movie. And a lot of scientists are like, this could have been a great shark movie, except you got the gills wrong. But like, the oldest creature on this planet is actually a shark. It's the Greenland shark. They live to 600 years old. Between 400 and 600 years old. They don't even reach sexual maturity till 200, and they're blind. Like, just, that doesn't seem like a fun existence. But yeah, sharks have been, and great whites are like, not the scariest sharks, because I kind of feel like bull sharks are more like hard to deal with. Like, you don't know what bull sharks are going to do to you. Great whites, here's the thing, and I feel sorry for fish. Everything they eat tastes like salt, right? Like, they've never had chocolate. Like, they don't know, right? So like, everything that fish eat tastes like the sea. So if they eat us, they know, like, we don't taste good because we're not salty. We don't live our whole lives. So I'm convincing myself and all you guys, like, right? Like, we're not part of their world. It'd be so cool if like sharks were like, I'm going to develop an air system so I can go on land and visit the humans for once. You know, it's like, we're totally not part of this world, and we're going into a world where everything's foreign, even the plants. Like, if you're like walking into the sea, and there's like seagrass, it's totally different than grass that grows on land. There's no crossover. Like, we have amphibians who, like, sometimes they're in the water and sometimes they're on land, but like, plants don't do both. There's no like amphibious plant. There's like the plants in the sea plant. And like fish, these guys, we're not in their world. So they kind of treat us kind of like, they're really not interested in eating us. And I think that's like really key. This is like the top predator in the sea, yes. But if sharks are killed, the oceans are going to die. And if the oceans are going to die, we are going to eventually die. So the sharks are kind of like this clearinghouse for junk in the sea. They keep, like, you know, everything has a cycle, and they eat the things that are eating the coral, that are taking stuff from there that the smaller fish need to survive. And as part of this giant cycle in this ecosystem, we need sharks to keep the ocean and all the other life at bay. Like right now in America, we have a ton of trouble because years and years ago, lionfish from Indonesia got stuck in the bilge pumps of tanker ships and brought lionfish into the Caribbean, which are totally not. They're beautiful looking creatures, and they're super poisonous. Well, venomous. They're venomous, poisonous. They're both venomous and poisonous. And they don't belong in the Caribbean. They have no predators at all. So they're taking over, and they lay 30,000 eggs a week. So people are trying to eat them. People are trying to train sharks to eat lionfish because they don't get, like, the sting doesn't really seem to bother them. It just doesn't taste good to them. It's like ordering Indonesian food for, like, a shark that lives in America. It's like, I don't know. I've never had that before. But the thing is with sharks is that, you know, I end up starting to put like my journalism hat on and realize there are all these things we don't know about them. There are all these sharks that there's some cool sharks out there that I have yet to photograph. Like the goblin shark, by far, has to be the coolest shark I've ever seen, except it lives at like 2,000 feet, so you can't go there or your head's going to explode. I don't know like who dives around here, but getting beyond like 250 feet is an effort. And we're not going to be able to even go to 250 feet in 10 years because most of us who dive deep use helium to breathe, and there's not that much helium left in the world. It's like one of those things we can't make more of. So every time I get helium balloons for my kids for their birthday, I am killing my chances to dive a little bit deeper in the ocean. So he's kind of, it's a he, coming in to say hi. Actually, I almost never edited this image. Like, you end up shooting so much and you don't know what shark images resonate with people. Like, this is the last trip I went on about 3 weeks ago. I'm with my 7- and 8-year-old. My kids are, I'm trying to train my kids. I certified my 8-year-old in bubble makers, and I helped my 7-year-old kind of get ready. He can't go scuba diving quite yet, but so they're both in the cage with me at 6 feet with regulators, and for them the water was just cold. I think that's all they took away. They were like, "Can we go back up and watch like YouTube now and play video games?" Like they were in there for like an hour, and then it got like it is cold. And my 7-year-old is like tiny little boy, and they do not make heavy wetsuits for like tiny little kids because no kids usually go swimming in super cold water where sharks live. So I didn't know if like child services was going to come knock on my door about taking my kids. But like I totally passed by this image in like first round. Like, I don't think I'm going to edit this one. And then it ends up being like kind of one of my favorite images. So now at Guadalupe, you have tons of these like skipjacks and baitfish that are all over the place. It's kind of really annoying at some points, but then like sometimes because their eyes are so big, I kind of think they have like, there's a shark behind me kind of look on their face. So I know I'm anthropomorphizing them. I actually wanted to, if you guys all kind of turn over and look at this upside down, it looks like a joker from like a deck of cards. But I kind of want to make a t-shirt out of that. I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet, but that's like the joker fish. So I ended up deciding, start pitching some ideas, and I ended up getting an assignment to go to Cuba, to Gardens of the Queen, which is a coral reef that has probably looks the same as it did 600 years ago. This used to be Castro's private reserve that only Castro would swim in, and that his friends, and to this day, there's only one operator through the Cuban government that's allowed to take people there. 900 to 1,000 divers a year are allowed to go there. And I ended up getting an underwater research visa and was able to fly direct from the States, which for a long time was really hard to do. This is how crazy my family was. My wife does not scuba dive, but decided to go with me on this trip. And so we taught her how to scuba dive while we were surrounded by sharks. I figured that was like a good way to really inspire her to not die. But, you know, and these guys, these are like reef shark, Caribbean reef sharks and silkies, which are, to be honest, not super friendly. There's at one point I'm like getting low on air, and we're in like 3-knot current, which is currenty. It's just burly. And I'm coming up, and I'm kicking on my back, and they started eating my fins. So I have like bite marks and plastic taken out of my cressy fins. You guys suck. No, I'm just kidding. But it was really, there's so many there, so many sharks. There's such a healthy reef system that every time you go diving, you are surrounded by 20 sharks constantly. They're all around you. And it was an amazing experience. And it's, you know, you're not in a cage. You're diving with them. You're swimming with them. So, and this is like a fun thing with like technique-wise. I was actually shooting video. And there are kind of like rules about shooting 4K video on, you know, a DSLR or on a digital still camera versus a video camera, that your shutter plane should only be double what your film speed is. So if I was shooting 24 frames a second, I never want to go faster than 50th a second when you're on land. Underwater, it doesn't matter because nothing moves fluidly. I know that sounds weird to say fluidly underwater, but nothing, it's not like things swim and there's the ocean and there's water and you're shooting through. So who cares if you're shooting at 250th of a second at 24 frames a second? It doesn't give a hyperreal kind of Saving Private Ryan feel to the film. You guys, so like Saving Private Ryan, the opening part of that movie, which is really like jumpy and jaggedy, is because like Steven Spielberg had the shutter plane be at like 1,000th of a second when he was filming. So it has this hyperkinetic feel to it. Or when you see like a car commercial, like when the car's driving up on TV, there's a car commercial, but it looks like the wheels are turning backwards even though it's driving forwards. That's when you're shooting at a high shutter speed. It kind of creates this weird jaggedy feel to the film. Underwater, that doesn't happen because like there's nothing to gauge it on because there's, you know, water and stuff and things moving. So I actually was shooting 4K video at like 500th of a second and then just making stills from the video. So this is actually a still from the video of the shark feeding frenzy. I'm actually about to get slapped by that fin. And then I just decided, I called him Donald Trump because I felt like he kind of looked like him from the side a little bit. Maybe that's just, I'm just reading into it too much. But you know, just, I think the cool thing, the hard part about diving is like staying alive and remembering to breathe, and then also trying to compose and make images. Makes it like when I'm on land, I'm like, I'm automatically breathing and I'm fine and I'm standing right here. I'm not like floating off into the sunset as I make an image. When I'm underwater, I'm like, oh, I got to swim and float and breathe, but not breathe too much because I don't want like my bubbles getting a shot. And then if I breathe a little, I'll sink, but if I breathe more, I'll kind of go up and then make the picture also. So there's that added challenge of like the physical part of it and figuring out what you're doing and then still trying to be like, because you're still moving. Or it's not like I can take 20 pictures of the same thing until I get it right. And like, I love Alex Webb and Steve McCurry, if only for not the content, but like how to look at layering and how to see the world and having a foreground and a background and creating dynamic compositions that moves the audience's eye. And that takes standing in one place and waiting for something to happen to make the image. But you can't do that underwater. So everything I know that I learned from photography to be the photographer I want to be doesn't work underwater. Doesn't work because I can't stay completely still. I'm going to kind of move, and then I'm not going to be like, okay, can you hold that? And smile with your eyes. Because they're not. So you have one chance, and you have to be prepared, and you have to know what your limitations are. I know that if I lift my head up too much, I'm definitely going to get water in my nose. I don't know why that happens, but I also know that I have a broken nose. I broke my nose in Iraq, in Mosul, in 2005, and I don't have to equalize. It just happens automatically. So I could just dive. I never have to touch my nose. It's just like I have this broken hole in there, and it's fine. Yeah, so that's why I've never got it fixed. My wife is like, your face looks like a Picasso painting. And I was like, yeah, but it's working for diving, so I'm just not going to fix the nose. Other creatures are fun. You have to, listen, I don't have a lot of limitations. I'm not really interested in climbing Mount Everest, but beyond, well, maybe. But there was one time I was on the side of a cliff, and I was like, I'm not into this so much. But beyond that, I'm good with things. So this is a saltwater crocodile. But you have to, like, do it with a little bit of knowledge. Albeit I didn't have much when I first did the great whites, but there's some risks you can take and some risks you can mitigate. We fed him 10 raw chickens. Actually, this is the last part of, like, the chicken. 10 raw chickens before I was like, I'm getting in. They're like, yeah, let's stuff him up. Let's make sure he is so not hungry for a little piece of bed. And so he had 10 chickens, and I'm like, I'm in the water. And he couldn't care less because he was full. I actually think he's just like, his mouth is open. He's waiting for more chicken. I'm not a chicken. So, you know, but he, like, went by me, and, like, the tail, like, went on my arm. I really try not to touch any creatures because we have, like, people land juice on us, and I don't know how it impacts and all that stuff. But, like, you don't want to interfere too much. I'm already interfering, right? But his tail kind of, like, went up against me. So cool. But, you know, he didn't eat me, which was nice. I've seen saltwater crocodiles in Australia, which are the biggest ones. They're, like, 20 feet long, and they can take out a shark. Like, they've seen, like, because they're more maneuverable. The shark has a speed, but they have the pounds per square inch on their bite and can turn on a dime. So there have actually been cases where saltwater crocodiles have eaten sharks. Doesn't happen all the time, but, like, they're burly creatures. The ones in Australia, I would never, ever swim with. I'm just saying that. I mean, for the right amount of money, from, like, Nat Geo, yes, I would totally do it. But, like, yeah, no, like, everything in Australia can kill you. That's the thing. I don't know if anyone's been there, but, like, when the first people got to Australia, they're like, no one is ever going to invade this place. And then when when the British came, they're like, you know what, we're just putting our prisoners here. Because it's really everything. Like, the worst jellyfish, the worst sea snakes, the giantest creatures, just, like, spiders that will, like, make your eyes bleed. Like, it's like the worst place in the world. But I would swim with most of the box jellyfish is super cool. I don't know if you guys have seen, like, it looks like a box. Like, there's some really weird creatures in the world, like pink flamingos, because, like, who decided that? And, like, a box jellyfish. Like, I'm going to make a creature that's a complete square. Like, how does that come up in nature? Or like these, it's a shoe that will eat you. But he was cool. It's actually the same crocodile. They actually always take people to go see. He seems to be habituated to human beings. And that's actually kind of one of these big projects that I want to work on now that I've been doing more wildlife, is this idea of the habituated and the unhabituated, like animals that know human beings, that have seen us, whether they're wild or domesticated, but they have a knowledge of human beings, versus animals that have never had contact with people. And I think it's really interesting. My wife is Filipino, and we have this little farm in the Philippines, and there are whale sharks all around us. And this is like an interesting part of this. So my kids have been swimming with whale sharks since they were little in the Philippines. And one of the things I think is really interesting is, like, in the Philippines, this one village decided that rather than fish or pollute or do anything against the sea, because a lot of fishing villages are, you know, if they're ever going to be coral refugees, it's going to start in the Philippines, where a good 30 million people live off the sea. And when those coral die, which they will, all those people are going to be refugees and are not going to be able to have a living or have food. And they're going to create another refugee crisis, but this is kind of be like a climate change refugee crisis. And this town decided to get into a symbiotic relationship with whale sharks. And no one knows if this is good or bad, but they go out every day and feed these whale sharks. Whale sharks come in, and they're fed by this town, and tourists come and pay the people in the town to go swim with the whale sharks. So the town makes money, and the whale sharks are fed, and then the townspeople are taking care of the whale sharks. Except these juvenile whale sharks now do not know how to get any food on their own. So they don't know how to be wild. They're like the difference between a wolf and a dog you keep at home. You feed the dog, but I have wiener dogs, you know, like dachshunds. If I let them go out into the street, they would have no idea how to survive. Like, they sleep on pillows, right? They wear jackets during the winter, right? They like eat table scraps. Like, they would not know how to deal with like being on like a street dog, right? So like, if this town decides to stay, you know, to not help whale sharks, what are these juveniles going to do? Like, I've seen whale sharks in this town that have gone, you're talking about a 30 to 40 foot, 30 foot. It's the biggest fish in the ocean, basically. A whale shark is the biggest fish, non-mammal fish in the ocean. They go completely vertical, the juveniles, when they get fed. In shallow waters, in 20-foot water, some of these, they'll like drag their tail and go completely vertical when they get fed. They're filter eaters. So they have these giant mouths, but their throat is about this big. So they just basically, like, these great vacuum cleaners of the ocean. They just go, and stuff goes in, and then like some food gets in, and they go, and the rest goes back out. You want me to do that sound effect again? I can. I actually will record that for anyone who wants it as a ringtone. But you know, but the whale sharks here are so used to people that it might not be good. So you know, it's like this really interesting dynamic. Whereas like the pumas that I shot, or the cougars down in Chile, had never seen human beings before, didn't know how to deal with us. Versus like these whale sharks, versus like wild animals. Like in America, we have black bears that break into people's backyards and swim in their pools. There's actually a really cool viral video, it was out last week, of just this whole family of black bears, which are about the size of us, swimming in someone's pool and like playing with like pool inflatable toys. They had to change. If you go camping in America, you have to have bear-proof canisters to keep your food in, especially in the Northeast, because bears will come to your campground and like take your food and maybe eat you by accident. So you have to like hang your food on a tree, and you have to put it in these canisters. Well, for years they were square, and bears have learned how to open up the food canisters to get to the food inside. So now they're like, they're cylinders, because the bear still doesn't have like a really opposable thumb and can't open a cylinder bear container. But like, so they're learning, so they're used to like human beings. And so all these things are really interesting, like where in our relation, there was a great study that animals today, more than ever before, are becoming nocturnal, just so that they don't have to be around human beings, so that they are more active when we're sleeping. Even creatures that are typically not nocturnal are now becoming nocturnal. Deer and a lot of like foxes, all this stuff, like animals that typically are out at both times of day are now just trying to be out only at night so that they don't have to deal with human beings at all, because we're impacting their world so much. Turtles are fun. So this is still in the Philippines. I went to Apo Island, which is kind of like one of the top 5, top 10 dive spots in the world, and I did not go diving, which is weird. I just went snorkeling, and I was really trying to teach my 6-year-old, well, he was 6 then, how to deal with swimming. It's good to just throw them in the ocean and go for it. You know, if he doesn't survive, I can always have another one. But he's listening right now. But you know, so we did this project for Sony about how to photograph your family, and so like as I'm making these images, I also have like one kid on the shoulder and another kid grabbing my leg, and I'm trying to get them to experience this world with me. And but again, it's all about, like, for me, it's all about approach. Like, backscatter is when light like reflects off floating fish poop, because the ocean is filled with fish poop. Because fish poop, where does it go? In the ocean. And so when light bounces off of it, that's annoying. And we call it backscatter because it's better than saying, I have a picture of floating fish poop in front of my picture of my shark. Like, it just, no one wants to say that, so we call it backscatter. But like sometimes I want to use it. I want to use it to create texture, or again, there are all these different rules about photography which I think are totally meant to be broken. Whether it's doing photojournalism or fashion, because when I did fashion photography, I didn't include it in the slideshow, but I was asked to go shoot like Fashion Week. It was a trend in 2008 to get war photographers to shoot fashion, and I left one of the. I was in Kurdistan, and I had just finished a big project in Kurdistan and was in a bombing like the very last day I was there, and I flew back to the U.S. totally frazzled and had to go to New York Fashion Week and then Milan and then Paris, and I just wanted to make fun of everyone, because I was like, I was in Iraq and you guys are worried about clothes, like clothes that most people aren't even going to wear. It was like the haute couture, it was like the crazy hats and like just, yeah, things that most people don't wear. And I was like, and they're worried, and they're models, and everyone's eating strawberries, and I was just like, I was not in the right place. So I actually duct taped my strobes to my feet. I was wearing Keds, and I would just be like, kick up and underlight everyone, because it gave everyone like super big eyebrows. Like I was like doing a Karsh version of when he used to photograph the Nazis and made fun of them. So he underlit them to make people look like evil. So I just had like these flash on my feet, and I was going like this. I was just walking around kicking. It was like chorus line, and just putting lights under people's eyes, because like their nose shadow would go like this. I totally wanted to make fun of that because there are no rules. Eventually, I didn't make fun of everyone, and I tried to do my job. But like that's because I could say I was frazzled because I was just in a bomb blast, and that's why I was doing it. But so for me, when I shoot, I want other stuff. I want to shoot at a low aperture. I don't want to shoot at f8 or f11 and have just, there are these things like, oh, you can tell like if someone really knows what they're doing with the strobe underwater if like the belly of the fish is white, because that means you just have like the strobe in just the right spot, or like there's, no backscatter in photos because they've aimed the strobes in just the right place. And I don't know any of that. I just want to do what I feel when I'm shooting, when I'm swimming. I want to feel the environment I'm in. I want every environment I'm in to tell me how to photograph it. That's why I feel like I don't even have my own style in photography, because every story I work on will tell me. You have to be mature enough and open enough to say, this is how it's telling me to shoot. Am I going to shoot it in black and white? Am I going to shoot it in color? I don't know. I don't know until I start doing it. So, but one of the best things about this new kind of place that I'm in is, like, I wasn't going to take my kids with me to Afghanistan. Like, it just didn't work. Like, I'm photographing, like, heroin addicts and bodybuilders, not at the same time, or, like, soldiers in Iraq. Like, it's not the place for my kids to be there. But if I'm photographing turtles, or if I'm photographing whale sharks, why not take my kids with me? And give them that part of the experience, and also basically get a family vacation paid for by my clients. So it's kind of a 2-in-1 here of being able to travel and then being able to travel with my kids. So I started working with a friend of mine, the smiling sea lion. Everyone likes this. So I started working with a friend of mine in Mexico. We get along really well because we're basically the same, except he's British. He's everything but British, and he has hair. But which I don't hold against anyone if you have hair. I just want everyone to know, if you believe in evolution, that we came from hairy apes, and that became human beings, that means that bald people are the next evolutionary step. So just went from hairy to less hairy, right? So this is like I've moved beyond everyone. I just want you all to know. That's my theory, but I don't know if science is going to give me that one. But let's just accept that. So I started working with these sea lions, which are great. This is this sea lion. I call this karate chop. This is a small sea lion colony in La Paz in Mexico. It doesn't have a lot of natural predators that go there. And what happens is there's kind of the Las Vegas of Mexico's in Cabo. And a lot of the males who don't make it as like the head alpha males in the sea lion colony end up going down to the docks where the tourists go and get fed, and they become like these giant, fat, low-fee sea lions who don't mate with anyone because they got kicked out of the colony, but they're happy because they're getting fed every day. So then there are no predators at this one, because these aren't the fat ones. This is just like the super wild colony where there are a couple of alpha males, and then there are all these juveniles, and they're in these nurseries. And we've been swimming with them enough time that you can just sink down and spend a lot of time. It's kind of, you're not going deeper than 30 feet, so with one tank, you can get like a 90-minute dive. And I'd be going like up and down and back and forth. And you can make like 2 hours on one tank and just hang with all these like creatures. And they really get to know you. They're a big fan of dome ports. So this is one of those instances where I use like a giant dome port because the sea lions can see their own reflection in it, and then it'll start like banging into your dome port. And then if your lights aren't angled right, you get like weird shadows in their nose, and that's not good. But then they'll bite your camera and your regulator hose and pull it out of your mouth, which has totally happened to me a few times. But other than that, it's really fun. And you can really take the time. And I spent so much time there over the last 2 years that I just decided to take my kids there as well. So they've all swum with these guys. Like, there are these nursery areas at this colony where it's just like basically sea lion teenagers who are just playing around the same way. Like, they remind me of dogs, and they play just like puppies. And they just want to like, so this is in the nursery. It's in like a cave. You kind of swim down into a cave. And they're tiny. They're like this big. And they just want to know what you are. Like, actually, they love the air out of regulator. I'll take my octopus, which is like the your backup regulator, and I'll just spray air up, and they start playing around. It's like throwing a bone to a dog. They're amazing creatures. And again, for me, it's all about finding different ways to shoot and different perspectives. So I'm actually lying. I took my BC off and my tank off, and I put it down on the ground, and I'd lie down on the ground, and I just flat, and I shoot up. And because I think that's one of the best perspectives that people don't think about. When we swim, everyone swims looking down. All of us, we all swim looking down, especially underwater, because if you turn up underwater, you're definitely going to get water in your nose, like depending on your mask, right? If it's just goggles and you're like this, it's like no one does that, right? We all swim looking down. But no fish do. No fish swim looking down. They see the world around them. They see the sun from in the water. We never do that. And a lot of times people who are claustrophobic take scuba diving lessons to help get over their claustrophobia. And one of the best things to do is turn people upside down and have them look up at the sun from underwater in the same way that fish do. Because then you're experiencing the ocean in a way that the creatures who live in there do. If we're always looking down, no other creature in the sea looks down. They're always looking at the sun and the moon just like we are. But they do it from the ocean. So I try to do this on every dive, is try and figure out how to lie down. It's hard to do when you have a tank on your back, so sometimes I'll just like take it off. So an important thing to do, again, just like laying down, is to play around with technology, to play around with the way that we see the world. So if anything that I do is trying to figure out new ways to communicate with people, whether it was like using the iPhone or shooting the oil or shooting through the windows. For me, you can't, if great whites have been shot before, and a lot of good underwater photographers are out there, a lot of good photographers are out there, and there are probably more photographers out there than ever before, because now everyone is a photographer because of your phones. And you have underwater housing for phones, and people are taking pictures everywhere, and my mom is constantly sending me pictures of flowers from her garden. She's like, I'm a flower photographer now. And if she takes 1,000 photos of her flower garden, I guarantee one of them is going to be really good, just by process of, law of averages. You're going to make, right? So there are a lot of, so how do you do something new? So there are ways to experiment with different ways to represent movement and space, and I am very much into doing that. And so, this was that still image that I showed before, but now here it's also some of it is moving. And this could get cliche. I have no idea. It could be like just a weird cinematograph, but I think it's really important to push the boundaries of what we can do and how we represent what we see, because at the end of the day, we want people to feel something. You want to attract your viewers with a sense of wonder. For me, when I did war zone stuff or photojournalism, it was about having a discussion. When I do this stuff in the sea, it's not just about having a discussion, it's also about people getting to see things they didn't get to see. For the longest time, when I was a war photographer, I thought I was a sin eater. Sin eater is like this weird kind of Catholic idea, but I think it kind of goes everywhere. In the Catholic Church used to have this idea where people would take the sins from other people for a price and take it upon themselves, and then those other people would be sin-free, and just these people, who are usually like the outcasts of society, would be the ones that would take in all the bad deeds. And I feel that like journalists and photographers are like the world's sin eaters. We get to see everything that's bad in the world so that other people don't have to. And we represent it and we show it to them in a newspaper, but other people don't need to be there. And that's changed a lot, because to me, photography is a ticket. Photography is like an airplane ticket to somewhere else. It's an experience that most people have. My passport is like super thick. And I've been to a lot of places, some good, some bad, but there's something amazing to be found in all of those places. And so for me, photography is a way to see the world and then show it to people who don't get to do it, because not everyone gets to travel as much or gets to swim with Big Bertha over here. So there has to be a way to, this is another one. So you can actually use it. It doesn't have to be with just sharks. You can use it with anything. Water helps with this technique, but it could really be done with anything. So for me, photography is this ticket. And I wanted to kind of give that to my kids as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show videos. So we just did this for Nat Geo Wild, and my wife wrote the script, and we both filmed this. I'll just play this quick video. If it works. Is it working? Here we go.
Mom, how big are tiger sharks? Do we kill lemon sharks? Why do people eat sharks? Like, how big are they? Do we kill it for sport on purpose? Have you swam with them?
They ask us all these questions.
And we could talk to them about all the problems. Pollution.
And it's overwhelming.
Kill animals that are in the sea.
But when they're in the water, their excitement washes away our despair.
Hope that with every experience we give them, that they are driven to cherish the ocean, to cherish life, and to be part of the solution. Because this generation, these children,
They are the embodiment of hope.
I wish I was a sea lion. You know that, Dad?
You wish you were a sea lion?
Yeah. They're beautiful.
I agree.
So that's it for me. And totally happy to answer any questions. I'm a Gemini. I don't know if that's, but up to if anybody has any questions about any type of photography or what wetsuit I wear. I have. I actually just finished. I just did a big project for the New York Times, which should come out in like a week or two on choral sound, and I did a lot of it at night. So it's actually a lot of fun. I have these two giant light and motion lights, and fish go crazy when I turn those lights on. What? Yeah, like I'm in totally pitch black, and I'm right next to a coral head, and I turn these lights on, and whoosh, oh, they go crazy. I get like fish in my ears, like come up, and you're like pulling them out. It's a lot of fun. But the life at night gets like a lot more robust, for sure, than earlier in the day, especially with like the little creatures on coral and stuff like that. But then I have tried macros. I just kind of started doing it. It's not like my favorite thing in the world, but it is fun. Yeah, nudie branchers are great. Yeah, I have one of my friend who works in Mexico with the sea lions is like some marine biologist and identified like 5 of them, got to name them. So we're gonna like, I kind of want to discover one just so I can name one too. Yeah, I had to do teeth. I did a thing on because different fish have different types of teeth and make different sounds when they eat. So you hear, if you really listen closely, that you have an audio device to hear the different sounds fish make as they eat, because that is what attracts larvae to come back to coral heads and to spawn and to grow, like to different parts of coral heads. So you have like, some fish have teeth just like us, like across, and then some fish have teeth on 4 sides, and and some have beaks, and some suck up everything. And so like I spent a lot of time just trying to photograph teeth. But the fish don't listen to me. I'm like, can you hold this still? I just hold it, and they don't. Really annoying. One day, they'll listen to me. That's why I'm looking forward to the Aquaman movie, because like he talks to fish in the movie, and I feel like that could help me out. Like, hold that position right there, like it. Yeah. Totally. Oh yeah. I think if you do like a rear sync strobe with long, I was doing like 1 second exposures, and I was turning my camera like this because I wanted to like create like a weird scene, and then you just at the end you just pop off a little bit of a strobe just to freeze something that's in front of you. It works great with like sea fans, like just as a sea fan is moving, you just do something like this, and you create this whole swirl. But I've definitely seen a lot of people, like especially if you get into a bait ball, and if you're on a rebreather and you're in a bait ball and you're just standing still. So a rebreather is like you're not going to have any bubbles, right? And you'll be stuck the bait ball, so you'll have thousands of fish that will just form around you, and they form these balls so that other predators think it's one giant sardine creature, instead of like thousands of little sardines that they can eat. And they can form around you. And then there'll be fish all around you. And then you can just do like a swirl with it as you move, and have like 30th of a second and just a little bit of a pop, and you can get like movement and then some clear shots. Totally. I don't know how to use a rebreather. I think my personality would not be right for a rebreather. I'm the type of person who just jumps into things and just does it, hey, and like that will kill you when you use a rebreather. Like I think you need to be like the type of person who like stacks your coins at home when you get home from work. Like you take coins out of your pocket and you stack them, and then like everything in your refrigerator is really organized in alphabetical order. That's the type of person who should be using a rebreather, who like checks it every day and like puts all the parts just right. Like, but if I ever did use a rebreather, that's what I would do. And then I would have someone else check it for me. Are you rebreather certified? No. Okay, yeah. I have a question. Yeah. I have 2 answers. Okay. Just to, why not? Right.
What I saw today was very nice.
Yeah.
Our main problem is how to use the
So when you have bad visibility, strobes are like the worst thing in the world, right? Because they're bouncing off everything. I mean, I think light fundamentally works so different underwater that if you turn it out and actually pump it up really high, and you have a diffuser, but turn them out, so you're just getting a little bit of the cone of light from the side. Yeah, that could help. So if you take your the strobes and you angle them all the way away, that could help a lot if you're shooting wide angle. But the cool thing, and I'll give my little Sony thing, is like the Sonys, you can go to such a high ISO, and when you're shooting raw, I mean there are a lot of times where it's like super cyan and green, and when I go into I use Photoshop RAW or Capture One, it's like one of the two, but you can correct for all that now. And I can make an image that I shot without a strobe look like I shot it with the strobe. So if you just up your luminance of cyan, you will make the belly of a shark or a fish white. Like it'll look like you shot with a strobe. So there are ways around it. I mean, I've definitely been shooting in zero visibility, not zero, but in really bad visibility, like on a shore dive where it's just sand all around you. And sometimes it's it's not worth it. But I think in those instances, it's actually really great. I know there are rules about having the sun at your back when you're shooting. Like a lot of people say, your sun should always be at your back. When you're shooting in zero visibility, I almost want the sun in front of me, because then you could have rays of light and it cuts through and maybe you'll get a silhouette of something. But that's if you're shooting more super wide angle and something's there. I think like shooting manatees and in really not clear spring water. There are ways around it, but I mean bad visibility is bad visibility. There's not a ton you can do. Yes, the turn your picture into black and white. I also think micro contrast. So Photoshop doesn't have it, but Lightroom does. But and a couple of separate third-party apps do. But running up micro contrast in midtones and in highlights really add to a thing. So if I look at in this shot, it's really bad visibility. But I turned my micro contrast up, so it's actually giving me a lot more clarity, and it's pumping all these rays of light. It's allowing me to kind of separate those, so at least it gives it a little bit of texture, and that's one way to get through really crappy visibility. Because the original image of this is super flat, and there's tons of stuff in front of it. So did that answer? Okay. Anything else? I've answered all your questions. You have nothing left. I should write self-help books because videos from Iraq? No, because that was like before the invention of still cameras that shot video. So I was out of Iraq before like the Canon, the 5D Mark II came out. So I was using like, you know, giant Nikons, and like I eventually went to the Canon like 5D, but the 5D Mark II came out like right in 2010. So I was already out of Iraq by then. I did shoot a lot, like I used that really extensively with the Haitian earthquake. And I shot a video in Haiti, you know, of like earthquake recovery and stuff like that. It's pretty graphic though. But, you know, so I mean, I have used some of that stuff. I've used some video, I've done some videos in Afghanistan of like like an electrical story and stuff like that. But for the most part, I've only been doing more video since I transitioned into getting eaten by animals. Because I'm hoping that like I'll catch my foot being eaten one day. Be like a first-person perspective. But if this is it, I am a really successful speaker. Because, all right, thank you. Appreciate it.
We would like to thank you very much for the exciting lecture, and we would like also to have collective photo. And here is a small thank you certificate from us.
Oh,
okay?
thank
Would you come, everybody?
I can pump this up on the big screen. Oh, okay. Oh, wow. Thank you. Are you wide enough? Is that what?
Oh, today it should be sunny, not
Maybe like F8. I don't know.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you very much.
you
It was a
so
pleasure.
much.
Thank
No,
you.
thank you.
And everybody, don't forget please to take your certification.
Oh, yeah. No, thank you. Appreciate it. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'll give you my card. Here. Yeah, yeah. Sure. Oh, no, thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, so feel free to pick that up. Yeah. So. Well, you know what? This is a wet lens, so you're not going to use this for an over/under, so you won't have water drops on it. But shampoo, some people put the stuff you use to wax a car. You can put on. I do. They go on the side. Oh, I was just shooting before in the it's not set up for underwater right now. But yeah. Yeah. But the cool thing about this is this comes off. So I can do two focal lengths. So this is an 11 millimeter, and when I take this off, that's a 28. So, you know, and since I'm shooting with the A7R3, I can also crop in on it, so I get 4 focal lengths.
I'm using A7R2.
Okay. Same chip. Better.
I'm using a macro lens.
Yeah. Okay. The 90 macro. Yeah. So on this one, the autofocus is much better. So you don't have to manual focus with the macro. That's the only reason that I do it. But
It's amazing.
oh no, it's great. I love this thing. But this is also, yeah, go straight down. But
We are using
the same housing. Yeah.
And the rows are 3.00.
Yeah, you can pump it. You can through the bulkhead. You can pump it full of air. So it comes a little bit more buoyant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
Thank you. 3. Good one. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, of course.